Welcome to How Leaders Lead, where every week you get to listen in while I interview some of the very best leaders in the world. I break down the key learnings so that by the end of the episode, you'll have something that you can apply as you develop into a better leader. That's what this podcast is all about. Today's guest is Ethan Brown, founder and CEO of Beyond Meat. Now, you're going to hear a lot of leaders, and they'll talk about changing the world. But that is literally Ethan's mission at Beyond Meat. His company is devoted to getting the same protein as animal meat straight from plants so that they can reduce climate change, improve human health, and help animal welfare. Now, if that isn't an epic mission, I don't know what is. And you know, when you listen to Ethan, you realize just how powerful his sense of purpose is. It's the driving force behind the incredible product development at Beyond Meat. It's what influences their marketing and competitive strategy. It's also a huge piece of their team culture. That sense of purpose is like the ultimate source of renewable energy. Now, of course, your sense of purpose is going to vary, but great leaders know how to use purpose as motivation when the going gets tough or they need to reach a big goal. Ethan does this exceptionally well and with so much intelligence and humility to boot. So let's dig in and see how great leaders tap into the power of purpose. Here's my conversation with my good friend and soon to be yours, Ethan Brown. Ethan, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. As you know, I'm a big fan of your work and have followed your career and read a lot of your work. And so just really appreciative to be here.
You know, Ethan, I'd like to just start out by having you give us a basic primer. What is Beyond Meat and what kind of products are you making today?
Sure. So Beyond Meat is a protein company. And what we do is instead of running plant material and water through animals, we instead extract the core parts of meat directly from the plant, and we use a system of heating, cooling, and pressure to align those in the architecture of muscle or meat. And so if you think about what the animal's doing, they're consuming a lot of vegetation and a lot of water, and they use their biology to organize that in the form of muscle, which is familiar to us as meat. But what we're doing is taking those core parts of meat, which are amino acids, lipids, trace minerals, vitamins, and of course water, directly from plant material, and we are organizing those against the blueprint or architecture of meat. So we're building meat directly from plants. And for us, it's been an 11-year journey. We're getting closer and closer, but we do believe there'll be a day when we'll be able to provide a product to consumers that is indistinguishable from animal protein, and it provides terrific and nutritious protein for the center of the plate.
I understand that your dad, he was a professor, but he actually grew up on a farm, and he had a farm when you were a kid. It was basically his hobby.
Yeah.
Did that have any influence on you, Ethan?
Oh, yes, it did. It did. And my father, more generally, I've been very fortunate to enjoy a great relationship with him. And he's actually still teaching. He's at McGill in Montreal, and early on, he's an interesting person. He grew up in what was at the time rural Connecticut, and my grandfather, his father, was a minister, and had the opportunity to be the chaplain at a couple of different colleges, and so they moved a bit in New England doing that, but it was always in beautiful rural areas. And so when it came time for him to pursue his career, he really had to decide how to balance his desire to be in the outdoors and in nature with his career ambitions, which were pretty significant around academia. And so, when he got his degree in philosophy from Columbia, and at the time he set the record for finishing his coursework because he just couldn't stand being in New York City. And that's very unusual for a young person to behave that way, right? To think, I just got to get out of the city. And so that sort of stuck, that kind of urgency to be out in the outdoors stayed with him throughout my childhood. And so though we grew up in Washington, D.C., and then later in College Park, Maryland, we have a farm in the western part of the state of Maryland that became a retreat for us. And my father's a bit entrepreneurial himself. And so instead of it just being a kind of casual hobby farm, he turned it into a dairy operation with our neighbor up there. And so I did have a lot of time spent there and had an interesting childhood where I was, growing up in the city, but also having these long stretches of time out in the country. And so I think I really learned a lot through that process and informs my thinking today.
My mother, she actually lived on a farm, and I could see the schoolhouse that they went to about a mile
Okay.
away.
Oh,
When we used
great.
to go, I still can smell the tractor smell. And it's like in my mind.
Or the sound of a chainsaw, it just brings you right back. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Is it true? I read this somewhere that you were actually a fast food junkie. That's music to my ears, by the way. But
So
is it true that you really like fast food?
it's more on target than that. So I have just terrific memories of being on the Chesapeake Bay, and we used to get a big bucket of KFC and take it out on the bay and just have a great day sailing and enjoying KFC chicken. And so, my first date was at McDonald's, and I grew up really enjoying that, and I think it's great food and it's great experience to be able to get affordable food like that. And so for me, Beyond Meat has never been about high end chefs or 5-star restaurants. It's been about how do we meet people in their daily lives where they are and affect the most and highest number of people, providing them with nutritious food.
Well, I'm really happy that you enjoyed that Kentucky Fried Chicken for a while.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you did become a vegan.
Yeah.
What really drove that process?
It's interesting. So I got into energy because I cared, and I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating. When I was getting out of school, I was restless, like many young people, and I took a lot of different turns trying to figure out exactly how I wanted to express, my commitment to trying to make this a better world. And so I was sitting in my father's office, kind of right after school, and I was saying, I really want to stop studying right now. And I was in grad school. I want to just go out and enjoy myself. My friends are doing X, Y, and Z. He said, well, let's talk about your career. I said, okay. And he said, I said, Dad, how should I think about this? He said, well, what's the biggest problem in the world? And it didn't come to me right away, but I said, I really think it's probably climate, because if we can't get the climate stabilized, I could be the best lawyer in the world or surgeon in the world or whatever I could try to aspire to be. But if the world is destabilized because of the basic environment in which we live has become unstable, those things are going to be impacted, and it's going to impact everything. So if you ask me what the biggest problem is, I have to say, well, it's probably climate change. And so he said, well, that's probably a good way to focus your career. And so I did that. I thought that makes sense to me. And so I started to get into energy, and worked for a long time in energy. But I began to realize that it wasn't just the car we drive or the light bulb we use or the power plant that powers the facilities in which we work. It's also the protein at the center of the plate. And in fact, the protein at the center of the plate is probably a more important solution than anything else we can do in terms of addressing climate. And so that became a fascination for me. And I said, I got to go out and figure out how we can continue to enjoy the incredible experience of the culinary work we've done around animal protein, et cetera, but do it with protein that's derived from plants, and that will make a very significant contribution to climate. Now, I also had other motivations. When you grow up around animals on the farm, it's much harder to think about them as units, right? And so you begin to think about them in their lives. Then you begin to think about the use of land, energy, and water, and then, of course, human health, right? And so all of those things started to fascinate me, and I became really interested in this one concept, that I could focus on one thing, which is changing the protein at the center of the plate from an animal-based protein to a plant-based protein, and I could simultaneously advance 4 things that I think are important. That's human health, it's climate change, it's the conservation of natural resources, and lastly, animal welfare. I'd never seen anything in my career, and I still haven't today, where through a singular focus, you can advance 4 really important objectives.
What do you think you do most that improves human health? I want to go through each one of those trends. That's very interesting.
Sure. So I think it's something that's just constantly evolving. And so, and by the way, we've worked with KFC, as you know, and it's just been a tremendous experience. And you should be very proud. I mean, they're leaning forward in a way that just shows their leadership, and Kevin there. And I mean, it's been a remarkable partnership. And so the idea here is, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's try to get everything that's great about animal protein, which is, there's a lot, right? It's got good sources of protein, et cetera. But you have to also remember that the muscle which we harvest as meat is there for the animal to do work, just like the muscle in your bicep is there to do work. So not everything in that muscle is going to be great for you if you consume it every day, right? And so let's find a way to capture everything that's great in that and reduce the things that aren't. And so we think about our products have no cholesterol, they have lower saturated fat, they have no heme iron, they have no heterocyclemia. So all of these things that are increasingly of concern in the medical community, we can strip out. And so for me, we actually trademark this. We feel so passionate about it. Eat what you love. If you love having burgers, if you love having chicken, go ahead and keep doing it. But we're going to do it in a way that's better for you. And that's where plant-based meat comes into play.
Well, how do you Ethan respond to the criticism that you get that the food is too processed?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question because it is an important perspective that we have to do a lot of education around. And with the COVID-19 disruption that's happened to our economy, we've taken a pause on that. But 2020 really will be about, for us, clarifying with the consumer what it means to think about our process. And so, first and foremost, I really believe it's a tale of two processes. If you look at our process, we're stripping the protein from the plant. And how do we do that? It's pretty basic. So we have a supplier now that does this for us. But what happens is, let's say I'll take peas. So the peas are milled. So you have a flour, and then you place that flour literally in water. You change the pH level of that water. You could do that with a lemon if you wanted to. And that separates the fiber and the protein. The protein is extracted and it's dried. And then we run that through heating, cooling, and pressure. And that's essentially resetting the bonds from the organization that they would have in a plant to one that's more analogous to one that they would have in muscle. That's kind of our process. Now, you have to juxtapose that with the other process, which is to feed a lot of material to an animal, use the animal's biology to convert all of that into muscle, and then you harvest the animal or slaughter the animal. There are a lot of steps in that consumers are increasingly uncomfortable with, including the use of antibiotics and things like that. So we're able to skip all of that. So I think it's important to think about, process is simply a word, and it's actually, if you look it up, it's a series of steps towards a goal, right? So process is neutral. And I think there's been some clever marketing among incumbent members of industry to suggest that just because there's a process involved, that's somehow bad. I think it's important to step back and say, okay, what is the process?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I want to talk a little bit more about that later. The second trend that you're addressing, which you already brought up, was the whole issue of climate change. What would be the biggest thing you're doing that's going to impact that?
It's really around the more efficient conversion of plant material to meat. And so if you look at, if you take a burger, for example, that's created through our process, and you take a burger that's created through the normal process of running the plant material through the animal, we have 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And that just has to do with a lot of efficiencies along the way. And so just like in business, in operations courses, microeconomics courses, the goal here is to debottleneck the production of protein. And the big bottleneck in protein production is the animal. And if you can extract that from the process, you gain these efficiencies, which then afford these environmental benefits, and that's what's happening with us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The other thing that you're attacking, Ethan, is addressing global resource constraints. How are you doing that?
Yeah, so I'd also be remiss to not bring up, your alma mater at Missouri and the work you've done there. And so let me just take a second to do that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
We wouldn't be having this conversation if it were not for that university. I just can't say enough good things about the people there and the values they have. The reason I brought that up in this context is that America has these terrific land-grant universities. Missouri is one of them. University of Maryland's another one. I worked with both of them to form this company. And it's, I think, a really interesting outcome that two universities who have strong ag programs help to develop a company that will, I think, bring the next revolution to agriculture in terms of making it more efficient, right? And so if you think about the efficiency of our system, we're using 99% less water to produce a burger, right? We're using 93% less land, right? So the benefits there, are really quantifiable. And so our goal is then to make sure that we're not asking you as a consumer going to KFC or going to Taco Bell or going into any of these institutions to make a sacrifice because we know how consumers are, right? We have to continue to delight them. And that's why I do admire what Tesla has done, right? They've taken something that's a social issue and they've made it alluring. They've said, we're going to create cars that you're going to want to drive. You're going to seek this out. We have to do that at Beyond Meat. And I think we're on our way to doing that.
Yeah, we learned that many times. People do not want to compromise on taste.
They don't.
People want it all. They don't want to make the compromise. So you can talk about being more nutritious and, affecting climate change and all that. But if it doesn't taste good,
You're done.
People aren't going to eat it.
You're not going to get the ticket in your hand to have the conversation. You got to make it taste great, and that's okay. I mean, that's fine. Look, I mean, the original, Biz Stone is a friend and one of our early investors, and years ago when we were starting out, we used to talk about this that food is one of the original social media, right? It was what we all gather around to talk and meet and share our day and things of that nature. And so we want to enjoy it, and that's fine. We will fail if we don't delight the consumer, and we have to keep that front and center of everything we do.
Yeah, absolutely. The other trend that you're talking about is improving animal welfare. That's pretty self-explanatory if you're a cow, but give me your perspective on it.
Well, I just think it's we've innovated around so much in our life, and I love innovation. I'm very passionate about it. I think this is a story of American innovation that's as neat as any, in the sense that we're taking something that we all think is a good. We really enjoy that center of the plate protein, and we're trying to make it better. And so, we're not doing this over a telegram. We're not, doing it over a landline. We're doing it over something that has eclipsed all of those, and that's the process of innovation. Nobody had to lambast or denigrate the landline to make the mobile phone popular, right? And so we don't really have to beat up on the old system. We just have to make something that's better. And so, if you can create meat without using the animal, I think very few people would say that's not a good idea. Let's try to do it. And I think we can, and that then takes the moral question off the table. And that's something I'm very happy to do.
You've got some really altruistic things that you're trying to do here. Which one of these global trends do you think is most important that you just talked about? Is it climate change?
Well, I can tell you where the consumer is. The consumer comes to us first over health, for sure. And then there's a halo that can develop around the fact that you're doing something that's great for your body, but also can be really good for the earth. But it's interesting. There's some demographic trends, right? So 40 and older, definitely health is a driver. But young people, looking at the folks like Greta and others that are protesting over climate, they're coming to it first because of the environment. Now, we have to I always say, like, we got to get taste first, right? We've got to really delight the consumer. Second, nutrition. People think that plant-based eating is healthier. Don't disappoint them. Don't have it turn out that there's something in there that's not good for them, or that the levels of X, Y, and Z, are in excess or something. Make sure it really is healthier. And so we do a ton of work on that. We work with Stanford, we work with a bunch of different institutions on constantly looking at how do we make our products healthier and healthier. And so, but first and foremost, it's that consumer coming after us for health.
Now, of course, everyone today is concerned about infectious disease that is created from animals. And this has to make your products even more on trend. What are you hearing from consumers on that front?
You do hear that, and there have been some op-eds written by, particularly some academics have written on that point. I think what's happening here is you have to look at the ratio. And I have a terrific chart, which I sometimes show, which is the ratio of humans to livestock on the Earth's surface. And as you grow that human population, and if that ratio holds or even increases as the developing world becomes much more interested in eating animal protein, you are reaching very, very quickly the limits of what our ecosystem globally can handle. and what the biosphere can handle. You can't have infinite growth in a finite system. That's a pretty simple idea, but that's what we're trying to do. And so we have to somehow break that ratio. We have to somehow be able to feed the population without growing the livestock numbers, right? And in fact, dramatically reducing them. And so what you're seeing with some of these things is that we're bumping up against limits of what a ecosystem and biological system can handle. And so you are seeing, whether it's bird flu or what's happening here, you're starting to see those boundaries be compromised.
Ethan, you talked about why you started the company, and it seemed to be more of a process than an aha moment. I mean, did you wake up one night and say, "I'm going to do this"? And
No.
do you remember that aha moment, or
No. It's you got to get uncomfortable about something, I think, sometimes. And I started to get really uncomfortable about this year over year. I began to think there's something here in the sense of that you didn't need to use the animal to build meat. And I knew about veggie burgers and things like that. That was never my interest. What I wanted to do was to try to figure out, and this is something I think has helped me in my career, and it's both a plus and a minus for me for sure, is that I will marinate in problems in terms of like trying to figure them out, right? And so that can be really healthy when it's directed toward something that's positive like work, or but if it can be unhealthy if it's ruminating about something, right? And so in the sense that I just started to think this isn't the right way to go forward. How do we do something different? And year over year, I was in the fuel cell industry, and I was making great progress, as I mentioned, or you talked about. I was having a great career, right? But I just felt like there's an itch that I had to scratch. Really, when my kids were born, and I started to realize the food choices that they were going to have to make, I said, I got to go do this, because if I don't do it, I'm going to regret it. And so it was that discomfort really that pushed me over the edge the most.
I love the idea of people pursuing things because of just the fear of the lost potential that you have.
100%.
Well, you took the company public, and you've had enormous success by anybody's standard. Obviously you've achieved some tremendous personal wealth, but I know that you live a relatively understated lifestyle. You take Uber when you go on market tours. You don't take the limos, and you actually. The last I heard is that you drive a 2016 Prius. What's keeping you out of the limos and the Ferraris? I mean, how are you staying grounded?
That's fun. So I have to admit, I finally did get a Tesla, but I don't think I was just raised that way. I think, look, I was raised middle class, so I had no issues at all with material comfort growing up. Very blessed in that way, and I look at your childhood of moving around and just the incredible resilience, and I was very, very fortunate to have a middle class upbringing, but we were never the family with the nice cars or anything of that nature. And my dad being an academic, I think that was kind of his approach. And look, I'll buy probably a lot of land, things like that, but it's just kind of who you are. And
well, that's great. It sounds like you just might be the Warren Buffett of the food industry. I met with Warren, and he drives his Lincoln Continental, and he probably drives a Tesla now, for all I know.
I'll tell you what. So I love Buffett, and so it's funny, right? Because you wouldn't but the business school that I went to because of him. I applied to one business school, and they asked me in the interview for the school. They said, "Well, why do you want to come here?" And I really hadn't done my homework, unfortunately. I just knew that I'd read all Warren stuff, and I read all his annual reports and things like that. And I said, "Well, what do we want to study?" I said, "Well, I want to study leadership." And the guy's like, "We don't have a leadership program." I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to get in here." And so the interview after that went fine, but then I get back to my mother's, and I'm walking down the hall. I said, "Ethan, the back, your shirt's untucked in the back." I'm like, "Oh man, I'm not getting in. I should apply to more schools." Anyway, thank God I got in. And Buffett, that whole principle that he has around, simplicity, I find interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Warren, and I think you guys have a lot in common. I didn't know this until I started hearing about your company and reading about it, but I understand you're targeting flexitarians. I love that phrase. Did you coin that term itself? And what exactly is a flexitarian?
So we didn't coin it ourselves, but here's what it is. So 93% of the people at the nation's largest grocer that buy the Beyond Burger are also putting animal protein in their cart. And that's really important to me in the sense that we're reaching a mainstream audience, right? We never set out to reach a niche audience, right? So we want the consumer that is in the main to be buying our products, and that's why the relationships with KFC, et cetera, are so important, because that's where the mainstream consumer is, and that's where we need to be. And so flexitarian is someone who's using both animal protein and plant protein.
And interestingly, your strategy says you don't say don't eat meat.
Correct.
You know, what you've obviously taken a totally different strategy. And
sure, it gets back to that example. And I had an opportunity to meet with Bill Ford and recently, and I really admire what Henry Ford did around the automobile, and he didn't go out and say, the horse is terrible, the horse is it's all these bad things. He just said, I got a better way to get from A to B, right? And we don't say don't use the phone. We just say, hey, we got a mobile phone that's better than a landline, right? So I just don't think it's necessary to be negative. You look at all the great leaders in the world, and I've listened to your podcasts, and they're great. And some of the traits that you hear, I was listening to your Tom Brady one, like who wouldn't listen to that, right? And it's that positivity. It's like you can be hard on yourself. You can be so hard on yourself, but like don't walk around being negative, right? And so we just don't carry that with us. We say we think we have a better solution.
When I heard about KFC launching a plant-based chicken product in Atlanta, and I know there were just lines waiting people trying to get into, they just had to try it. So I called Kevin Hochman, the president of KFC, and the R&D people. I said, "Can you give me a product showing on this?" So I went to the KFC Restaurant Support Center. I tried your first product, and I have to tell you, Ethan, I just didn't really like it. It was a little too chewy for me. Then I tried your latest version, and it had all the characteristics of whole muscle chicken. I thought it was really, really so much better. Okay. And this happened within a span of like 6 months. Are you making that kind of rapid technology gains across all the meat categories?
Yes, we are. And I'm the first one to be totally dissatisfied with our products, right? So, the process for me is one that's difficult in the sense that what's on the shelves today, I think is good, but what we have in our labs is so much better, and I can't wait to get it out to the consumer. And the challenge is it takes a while to do that, right? But yes, I think that rapid iteration is very common within our company. And what we do is we have a very structured approach to that, which is called the Beyond Meat Rapid and Relentless Innovation Program. And it's that idea that if you marinate in the issue, if you can get yourself lost in the issue, if you can, and there's some great books on this, and it's just if you're leading a company, set aside time to read, because it just refreshes your perspective on things and you can gain so much insight. So one of the books that's made a big impact on me is Insisting on the Impossible, and it's about Edwin Land and the work that he did around Polaroid and how to create that environment where people can actually get lost in their work. They might forget to eat. They might forget to shower because they're so intensely focused on how do I make this product better, right? And if you can bring that intensity every single day, right, you'll see incredible progress. Now, if you're caught up in Gantt charts and spreadsheets all the time and long processes, and one of the things that I think is shocking to people when they come here is they'll come and they'll say, it's going to take us 2 months to do this. I go, well, how do you do it in 2 weeks? And we're serious. And we'll say, okay. And they say, well, we can't. I say, well, what resources do you need, right? And they say, well, go get them, right? And that's the kind of approach we have here.
Yeah, that's great. Michael Land, who did create Polaroid, did a great idea. But it didn't really flourish, to be honest with you.
Yep.
How are you going about the process of building a sustainable growth company? A lot of times people have ideas and then boom, it doesn't really take off and sustain itself. So you don't really want to be a Polaroid.
No, correct. And so there's a lot of other examples. And there's this great book recently, which I've become friends with the author by a guy named Safi Bakal. It's called Loon Shots. And part of the process of just staying ahead and leading and creating a category is to have a healthy sense to be terrified, right? To be paranoid. How do you stay, and that's been with me my whole life. How do you stay ahead, right? And I don't know where it comes from. Some people have it, some people don't, but I have that fear, right, of not delivering on what I'm trying to do, right? And if you carry that with you, right, you'll be successful if you work hard enough, right? And obviously some capability, but I think with cases like Blockbuster and there's so many examples, skeletons that just didn't react and adapt. I don't care about the technology we use. I'm agnostic. I'm not an engineer. So if what we're doing isn't working as well as something else out there, I will throw it in the trash and I will get the best approach possible, right? So you got to be agnostic and not fall in love with a particular approach, right? So if you want to have the best picture in the world, you shouldn't care whether it comes on a film that you have to shake or something that's digital. You should be focused on that best picture.
Yeah, that's great. The KFC R&D team led by Vijay Sukumar.
Yep.
When I met with them, they were blown away by your research team. They said you had over 100 scientists. You probably have more than that. Okay, but your head of R&D is from Iran. You have over 50 PhDs. You've got leaders from Vietnam, India. How do you lead such a diverse and high IQ group of people? What kind of skills does it take for you to have to work with a scientist who stereotypically are head down looking in their petri dishes?
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, first of all, it gets to some of the things that you've written a lot about. It's respect for people, and I really respect them, and I think they respect me. And it's a dance, I mean, I'm pushing them so hard, and they're pushing back, but we're so committed to this objective. And so many of them came out of biomedical, where they're working on trying to treat cancer, for example, and now they feel, if you think about let food be thy medicine. Now this is a way of hopefully helping people live healthier lives. And so, but there's been funny things along the way. I once hung up when I was in graduate school, there was a poster in one of our computer rooms I loved it. It was a picture of an apartment building, probably in New York, Chicago, something like that. And there was one light on with one person sitting in front of their computer. And it just said very simply underneath, somewhere someone is working harder at your idea than you are, right? And I couldn't find the poster. So I just got some canvas and I had it typed out on the canvas, said that quote, and I hung it in our innovation lab. And the head of innovation at that point came up and said, either a lot of people are asking who's working harder than us. I said, no, it's like a metaphor, it's like just a way to stay hungry. I said, no, okay. They came back. He came back. He said, and they still kind of want to know. They're kind of like insulted that you think there's someone out there who's working harder. I said, no. Think about it this way. Think about it as like it was something that would be hanging in a locker room. He said, a lot of these guys have never been in a locker room. I said, okay, I'll take it down. But so I took that down. But it's just.
I think I'm going to put it up in my office. I love it.
It's a great quote. And so it's that mentality. We just have fun together. We work so hard together. I have such respect for their intellect. And
I know you're a big believer in the fail fast mindset.
Yeah.
How do you really drive that deep in your culture?
Personal experience. I have failed a lot of things, and so I know that it's okay to fail. I think it's actually people who have failed are better leaders. They really are. So I think it's about effort. If you're putting in the effort and you're using the very best of your capabilities to try to do something and you fail, God bless you. If you're not putting forward the effort and you can't do something, you'll be very uncomfortable here. And that's the kind of culture we have. And so as long as someone, if you see them grinding and working and they make a mistake, fine. Or if they are so afraid of failing that they bury you in spreadsheets and in analysis and everything else where you just aren't willing, you can't move, right? They're also not going to do well here. So it's a culture that we put a lot of emphasis on speed. We reward risk-taking, and we're okay with failing.
You obviously believe that culture is critical to your success. Are you doing anything really different on that front? Are you trying to drive a behavior that you're not going to see in most companies?
I think it's intensity. It's intensity. Is I think intensity, respect for one another, accountability, ownership. All of those things are really important here. It's also a sense that it's a privilege to work here. I feel blessed to be doing what I'm doing. Like I really do, and I feel lucky. And I think I want other people here to feel that way too. It's a special place to be, and I want them to carry that with them. I don't know that every company feels that way.
you're a tremendous learner, obviously. That's coming through so clear in this conversation. And, a friend of mine told me that you're a big fan of the Got Milk marketing
Yeah.
campaign and that you actually hired the person who created it. And I was thinking about this, that was a long time ago. This person must definitely be a senior citizen. Is this true? That did you hire that
Yeah, I
person?
did.
And what's your thinking behind it?
I did. He's a good friend of mine, Jeff Manning, and so he was on the California Milk Board and wrote the original brief, I think, for the advertising firm that did that, which I think was Wyden and Kennedy, I think. And so, yeah, so he and I worked together for years, and we're still close. I was amazed as a young person that you could go into schools and gyms and that a particular protein could advertise directly to children in that environment. And so I wanted to learn about that program. But it also had an important element that was really vital to how we positioned our company. It was positive, right? And so,
Hmm.
I used to get in arguments with marketers who would say, you really need to bring out some clinical nutritionists to tell people about how healthy this is. You need to market directly to mom in a really clear way. And I said, no, I want to use athletes to do it. And I said, well, first of all, they had this. There's this. You go to any market, you go to Kellogg or something like that, the business school. They'll say, well, traditional paradigms that mom is shopping in the supermarket, so you should tailor all your marketing to her. And I said, well, I don't know. I had this really distinct experience when I was a kid where my mom was walking in the supermarket and I was with her and our football coach, and I wasn't a great football player. I was very thin, and but I played. But my brother was pretty big, and he matured earlier than I did, and everything. He's older than me. And he walked by and he said, you serving those two boys steak? Like something like that. I think exactly those words. Nice. He's sort of chatting with my mom. And that made a big impression on me, that type of thinking that there's this link between animal protein and masculinity. And that if you don't consume animal protein, somehow you're less masculine, right? And so I wanted to attack that at its core. And so I wanted to use the Got Milk campaign as a model that said, look, let's help people understand that it's the amino acids they're consuming and the protein itself, not the origin, right, that is important, right? And so I wanted the very best performing athletes in the world to start using our product and then go tell people about it. And then you know what that does? That arms mom with the information she needs to get the rest of the table on board. So when she brings home a plant-based burger, plant-based meat, she's not being, mocked by her children or by the husband. She has the tools she needs to get the rest of the family on board. And so that was a very deliberate approach, and I think it's worked. You want to inspire people. You don't want to preach at them.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask you your thinking behind having Kyrie Irving and Lindsey Vonn, and you even have Snoop Dogg,
Yeah.
and you've got investors like Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
You're obviously big into leveraging these big names. Are they coming to you? These people, I used to work at Pepsi. They'd cost us a fortune
Yeah.
to get them. How are you signing these people up as brand ambassadors?
Yeah. So many of them are investors first and foremost, and so that really helps, right? They're rowing in the same direction with us, and we have a woman who I'm good friends with who also works here called Beth Moskowitz, who is just a tremendous connector of people, and many of them have come through her, and we just really try to create a culture where we're a business for sure. We're going to create a great return for our shareholders, but we're also out to accomplish something that's really important. So I was on a thing yesterday, or a couple of days ago, with Chris Paul. Take Chris as an example. So Chris Paul, perennial All-Star NBA player. He's in his 17th season, 2020 All-Star game. He gets a lob dunk from Russell Westbrook. Chris is maybe 6'2", right? He's 35, right? And he's getting up in the air and just throwing that ball down. After the game, they asked, well, how are you able to do that? And one of the things he talks about is he switched to a plant-based diet, and that cuts down on the inflammation in his knees, right? And so, there are benefits to athletes for using this. But by the way, that reduction in inflammation is not just good for Chris. It's good if you're 60, if you're 70, and you're maybe battling with, arthritis or with heart disease, or so many of the diseases that we think are separate are actually related, and some of the things that tie them together have to do with inflammation. And so animal protein, it's well understood now in the medical community that helps to keep inflammation down, right? So if you're Chris, not only are you going to perform better, but hey, by the way, for his folks, this might be a better product for them, right? So there's benefits for him, not only professionally, but also in his community.
Hey, Ethan, you are turning me into a flexitarian. I used to work at Pepsi, and we had this intense rivalry with Coke, and it looks to me like you have the makings of this potentially happening with this company called Impossible Foods. How do you view them as a competitor, and what makes you different?
You know this because you're a competitor too. Competition is great, and it's even better when you're winning. So, but
that is so true.
and it's a lot of fun. People are like, "Oh, do you hate them?" No, I mean they're a good company. They're working hard. They got a lot of good people. They're trying to do the right thing. But there is a big difference. And the difference around this. So I started the company in 2009, and didn't do it with venture money to begin with. Took several years to get that, 2.5 rather. And so a lot of times we just had to rely on revenue to keep the doors open and everything else. And so I was in the stores talking to customers all the time. And one of the things that became really apparent was that people did not want GMOs in their product. They didn't want anything artificial in their product, right? And so you got to think about the mindset of the Homo sapien, right? Evolving, and there's some great literature on this, evolving. We were very conservative about what we're willing to put in our mouths, right? Because mistakes would kill us. And we carry that conservatism today. So I don't want to ask any family in America or anywhere else to experiment with their family and their kids on something that's never been in the food supply. So I said, all right, we're just not going to use genetic modification, right? I believe that there's everything in nature that we need to build meat direct from plants. It's if you care enough and work hard enough to find it, and that's what we're doing. It's a massive discovery. It's a search throughout the plant kingdom to find all the elements we need. But people want to eat healthier, but they also want to eat like their grandparents because there's conservatism. And so the big difference between the two companies, right, is that we've decided not to use genetic modification, and they are using it. Not bad, they're using it. Not a problem, they're using it. But that's not what we're doing, and we think that's a better long-term bet on where the consumer's going.
And then another competitor you have right now is just the meat industry. They're really taking some real cheap shots at you. How do you, as a competitor, deal with that?
So I personally don't like that, obviously. I listen to some of their podcasts, and it's hard to be beat up in the press and have people take stuff out on you, and you got to just develop thick skin. But what bothers me the most about that is, we talked about our farm up in Maryland, and on either side of that farm are people that are either currently or have raised beef cattle, and I have good relationships with them. And what's great about this country anyway is that if there's a topic you don't want to talk about, you can talk about sports, you can talk about politics, and so I just don't have to go there with them. And so for people but I like them and I want to be able to return and have nice relationships. And so I'm not somebody who's antagonistic toward the meat industry. I don't think it's necessary to be so. And so you've seen me forge relationships with them. We had a partnership with Tyson. I know John Tyson personally. I think it's a shame. I wouldn't do it myself.
Yeah. Right now, I know you talked about your passion of totally replicating the taste and characteristics of meats. What I know right now, because of scale and other reasons, you have a huge cost disadvantage. At least I'm supposing that. Is that something that you're going to have to live with, or what do you see as your opportunity and strategy on that front?
I really appreciate you asking that question because it's a big passion for me. We should not be more expensive than animal protein. It doesn't make any sense, right? So you heard me talk about this. You open up a microeconomics textbook, it says bottleneck comes out of production, you get more efficient, you get lower cost, et cetera, right? So we've taken the biggest bottleneck there is in the history of agriculture out of the system, right? And again, we're not perfect. We're not getting, we're not there yet. We'll get there to the point where we're indistinguishable. The chicken that we'll make 2 years from now from KFC, if we're lucky enough to still work with them, will be much better than what we're making today, even though the one today is pretty good, right? So we'll get closer and closer. But the issue is scale, right? And so there's no material obstacle to us underpricing animal protein. So I made a commitment a year ago that we would underprice animal protein in at least one of our categories of beef, pork, and poultry. And we'll do that. And then ultimately we'll be able to underprice in each category. Maybe not every single cut, but the vast majority of them. And that's going to be an exciting day because if we get the the texture right, we get that satiating taste and experience right, and then we drop the price below animal protein, there are very few consumers who can be like, I'm still not going to do that.
Yeah, I would say so. When you can have equal product quality and win on price, that's a pretty good equation. It works for a lot of people. How would you describe your management style?
It's interesting. I'm definitely more entrepreneur than I am kind of a CEO you'd bring in from the outside. I think management comes down to character, and personality and behavior traits, right? And so when you work with me, you get who I am. There's not a management style necessarily that's different from who I am as a person. So I think you'll get a lot of loyalty from me. You'll get a lot of intensity, a lot of ambition. I really do, as people say it all the time, but I really do try to hire people that are a lot better than me at what they do. And I've done that. And that has made all the difference in the world for me. And surround myself with people that are better at what they do than I could be. And so my board is full of very competent people. Mickey, someone we're talking about, is a great example, right? He's an extraordinary guy. He knows the field a lot better than I do, and I got to give him the freedom to do it, and that's what I do.
Yeah, that's Mickey Pant, who used to be the CEO of Yum China, terrific executive that I actually did a podcast with that you can listen to. Ethan, you've been described, and you just mentioned it, ambitious. You've been described as massively ambitious. By one of your former bosses. What's behind your ambition?
I think it's the desire to try to be of service to a issue that is so important. And once you kind of get a taste of the fact that you can do it, it becomes enthralling, that you could actually get something done that's so meaningful, right? And so I just want to try to do it. And I think I've been very blessed as a child. I wasn't always successful. Like I wasn't very focused at school when I was young. I wasn't until I was in college that I became very academically interested. But I was surrounded by people. My father's a good example. I'd come downstairs early in the morning to get ready for school. Sometimes be as early as 5:30 or something, and it would sound like it's raining in my basement. I'd be like, "Wow, what the heck?" And so I'd go down there, and he was just banging away on this IBM computer, writing whatever book he was writing or whatever. And then I had my grandfathers were both very, my grandfather, as I mentioned, was a minister. My mother was an entrepreneur and a publisher. I have great role models around me that were successful people and who were leaders. And I think that helped me a lot to say I wasn't going to check the box in life. I was going to try to go out and do something that was meaningful. But I would say this. I've listened to some of your podcasts. I am not someone who was dreaming of being a leader. I am much more a reluctant leader. I think I'm someone who has found a problem that they feel enough passion about that they want to solve, that they've been able to articulate a path that other people are willing to follow with them and join them in. But I'm not someone who was, sort of dreaming as a kid of being a leader. That wasn't me.
Now you are a big time leader. You're a CEO of a publicly traded company. How are you going about getting better at that?
Through discussions like this and reading, I think just learning from others. I very much agree with the statement that success leaves clues. To be humble, just be humble. There's a ton that I can learn, and we're all a mix of confidence and insecurity, and it's okay to be insecure about things and to try to address them. And so much of the work of being a better leader at this point is now internal work. How do I work through issues within myself that I want to address, right? And the better that I can do that, the more effective I'll be as a leader. I'm less into management books, and I'm more into that process of better understanding why I make the decisions that I make, why I do what I do, so that I can improve on weaknesses and be a better person and be a better leader as a result. Talking about books, there's a book by Robert Sapolsky called Behave. It's frigging long and it's too long, but it's about why we do what we do from a neurological perspective, and it's fascinating. And so for me, the next stage of leadership is better understanding, human behavior, including my own.
With this whole coronavirus a lot of people have had time to self-reflect. Have you been able to have the time to have more self-reflection through this?
I have. It hasn't been that the work hasn't slowed down. I think the coronavirus, obviously, it's just a horrific, awful tragedy, and not enough. I mean, cannot be. It's just, and just the loss of life is just incredible. One of the things that's come of it is the world has slowed down and stopped almost, right? And so you'll see things happening that are extraordinary in the sense of, I live in Los Angeles, and I can see the Santa Monica Mountains in a way I've never seen them before. They're so clear. The same thing happened in the Himalayas, right? Climate, greenhouse gas emissions have plummeted. Traffic fatalities have plummeted, right? So there's things that are happening here that we have to take from this and try to carry forward, even as we restore our economy. And so, yes, for me, it isn't so much the work has slowed down. It hasn't. It's that stuff at night that you were doing as a parent, running around to practices and things like that has stopped, right? And so I have had more time to reflect, and that's been enjoyable.
As a public company, your company came out and just the stock went through the roof, and then it really dropped dramatically. You've had tremendous volatility in the stock price. How has that impacted you, and how do you keep yourself up during those valleys?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, it did bother me, but you begin to, and you know this better than anybody, you begin to realize that they're just sometimes not rational reactions to things in the market. And the more you can understand that, the more you just focus on the long-term nature of your business. And I really do. The businesses that I admire are those ones that have carried forward that long-term perspective. And so Amazon would be a great example, right? We have to steel ourselves against trying to satisfy quarterly targets, and we have to think about the long term. If we do that, we can be a massive global protein company. If we don't, we'll be one of many players.
I used to meet with Warren Buffett every year in Omaha.
That's amazing.
We'd always have lunch at KFC, and he said, "Put your ego in your business performance, not your stock price." And I think that's very wise counsel. I remember early on in my days at Yum, I made a stupid mistake of saying we were Yum.com, and we bombed it. We went down like that at the hell of the .com companies too. So, I learned that. I want to ask you one other thing on just competition.
Sure.
Your Impossible Foods CEO, he's pretty bombastic. He makes these big claims that the plant-based products are going to outsell meat by 2035. How do you feel about a statement like that?
I don't make them. I don't think it's a good idea. First of all, I think humility is a really important part of leadership, and I hope that I am a humble person. That's how I feel about myself in terms of, I am. I'm hard on myself. Like it's funny. The other day, a colleague of mine didn't like the way I had done something, and she was very upfront and blunt about it. And it was a performance issue. It wasn't like and I agreed. But she was so worried about letting me know. And I said, if you only knew what I already thought about what I did, you wouldn't even worry about it. So just that, being humble and realizing that you're making, you make a lot of mistakes, stuff like that is really important. So first of all, I just stay away from statements like that. Second, it's antagonistic. I don't want to be antagonistic. When I work with Kevin and Andre at KFC and others, David, I want them to be so successful in what we're doing. I want them to succeed. And McDonald's, I've talked very at length about this. I want these companies to be super successful in partnership. And so let's just focus on that. Let's just focus on can we provide a healthy product for consumers and do so in a way that everybody wins. That seems to be the right focus.
Ethan, one of the things I've just started doing is just to have a little fun at the end of these conversations with a little lightning round, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I've had a blast already with this conversation, but I want to do just a real quick lightning round of Q&A, okay?
Sure.
Are you ready for this?
I'll try.
Okay. What 3 words best describe you?
I think passionate, I think loyal, and I think this thing about being intellectually thorough, I really try to get to the bottom of things.
Okay. What's your biggest pet peeve?
Oh, lack of effort.
What's your favorite movie and why?
Oh, Hoosiers. I will cry every time I watch it.
Me too. Share a random fact about you that few people would know.
Um, I'm trying to use this time during the COVID-19 crisis to learn piano.
Yeah. If you could trade places with one person for a day, who would it be and why?
It'd be one of my children, so that I could better understand how they view the world and how I could help them.
And I have to ask you this one. Do you have a pet?
How long do you have?
Oh, that
Yeah.
answers that question.
No, I love animals. I have a lot of them. Yeah. They're
Ethan,
fun.
you're an up and coming company, and so what do you think are the three most important characteristics you look for in the people that you want to really grow your business?
Sure. I think it's that shining capability. It's very clear to me that this person is special and can do things that maybe others wouldn't be able to do. So you try to find that characteristic, but it's worth nothing if there's not that work ethic. I will just all day long. I will bet on a work ethic. I mean, absolutely. And then just character, right? Are they going to do the right thing?
You mentioned failure a little earlier, and you're one of these guys. You look at them, and you've been so successful. What would be your epic failure? Do you have one that really stands out in your career?
Yeah, sure. I failed a lot. I mean, I was fired by my board when I was like 27 for we had a disagreement over something, and I didn't handle it well. I felt I was right, and I just sort of told them that I was right and that here are the issues the way they were managing, and they said, "Here are your walking papers." That was a mistake. So that was that was a failure. But there are other things. I mean, I've made mistakes and failed for sure
Now, so what would you see as your biggest success?
in business. For me, the thing is these partnerships that we are having with these QSRs, including KFC, are so important to me because it's where we're going to meet the consumer, and so I'd put those right there.
Yeah, it's interesting that Pepsi and Coke built their business, in the restaurants, getting people to try the product, the same way. So you're going about it the same way. And I have to ask you one other question, which is, can you share a little bit about your family and how you're striving to keep things in balance? Because you do have that intensity.
Yeah, that's one that's interesting. I mean, as important as all this work is to me, I'm pretty typical in the sense of that. My family's still more important to me for sure. And if I had to choose between the two, I'd pick my family. And I always have viewed my kids as like ice cream cones. They're going to melt. You better enjoy them, right? Because they're going to be up and gone, and so the time is now to enjoy them. And so I do try to be really involved in their lives, and generally through sports. My son is a very active basketball player, and my daughter's a volleyball player, and so it's through things like that. But even with this effort over this period to learn a new instrument, I bought my son a saxophone and my daughter a guitar. And, just try to be with them, try to be present because man, it goes so fast.
Yeah, that's just great. I have to tell you that I played the saxophone for about
Do you
6
really?
months, and before I decided I wanted to be a major league baseball player, and that didn't happen. So.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be at some point a basketball player, and I didn't go that far.
But Ethan, I have to tell you, I said at the top that you are an incredible human being and
Thank
more.
you. Thank you.
You are a really, really special person. One of those people that you look for, that does shine. And I've got one more question for you.
Sure.
You look out and you see beyond meat. What's your future back vision?
Sure. And so just before I answer that, I also I so admire, and I'm not just saying this to say it, but the journey you've taken in your life is one that's remarkable to me. And the work you're doing to create better leaders today, it's not just going to be listened to by leaders. Like my kids are going to listen to your podcast because of the value of the conversations you're having. And so I really right back at you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ethan. I appreciate it.
So the future for Beyond Meat, global protein company for sure. Active, very active in Asia, very active in Europe, very active here in the United States. And decoupling meat from animals so that we can continue to enjoy the dishes and the meals and the experiences that we have, but do so in a way that maybe is better for our bodies and better for the earth.
Well, Ethan, if there's one guy in the world that can make that happen, it's you.
I'm trying.
I always say, show me a leader and I'll show you a great business. There's no doubt in my mind, you are the leader. So thank you once again for being on this show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a real honor.
Well, I know you can tell from this conversation with Ethan that Beyond Meat is into innovation and continuous improvement. And believe me, he and his team are constantly trying to crack the code. In getting ready for this podcast, I actually went to the KFC test kitchens and I had them prepare for me the original chicken patty that they put together with Beyond Meat and the one that they have now. And I have to tell you, the improvement wasn't just incremental, it was quantum. And it just goes to show that what Ethan is working on with his team, it's going to happen. And he's going to do it because you saw the passion that he has. Now, you and I both know huge improvement like what's happening at Beyond Meat just doesn't happen. It's a result of an incredible team and an incredible leader. And I'm really struck by how plugged in Ethan is to his purpose. It's the reason he's pushing his team's timelines and not letting them get buried in spreadsheets. It's building a culture of intelligent people who feel empowered to take risk. And that purpose is the force behind his relentless positivity in how he approaches his messaging, his partnerships, and even competition. So are you ready for a little coaching? Let's go. This week, as a part of your weekly personal development plan, I want you to tap into the power of purpose for yourself in these 2 steps. First, think of something you're not satisfied with. Maybe it's related to your company or your own development or your community or the world at large. Then I want you to connect with the why you really want it to be better. When we answer that question honestly, we tap into the power of purpose. And that's what will help us lead our teams and ourselves to accomplish amazing things. So do you want to know how leaders lead? What we learned today is that great leaders tap into the power of purpose. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of How Leaders Lead, where every Thursday you get to listen in while I interview some of the very best leaders in the world. I make it a point to give you something simple on each episode that you can apply to your business so that you'll become the best leader you can be.